Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the table. Pull up a chair, take a seat. We are back with a very special episode. This is a very momentous occasion because I am joined by none other than Jim Welsh. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim has returned to the table. I don't even care about these other two. Jim, how have you been? You've been living in a cave for the last, 6 months or so. Like, what's been going on?
This is such a poor start because all these people are going to come on to see that the title is going to be like Sam and Levi discuss the Chicago Brawl, and the first thing you do is ask me how I'm going to do, how I'm doing in my life and things, and people are going to skip this instantly.
100%, yeah.
But yeah, it's fun. It's good to be back. Yeah, people are gonna be like, dude, come on, we're not here for this. But thank you. Yeah, I took a little hiatus during all my Fi adventures after Uprising, and then when Dynasty came out, I kind of ventured into some other paths. But I always, stayed in the shadows and read all the chats and followed things that were going along. And then I always get, and you can attest to this, I always get excited when a new draftable and new hero set comes out. That's when my blood starts, boiling again, and I go, wait a minute, why did I ignore this glorious game that is so fun and compelling and exciting? And then when this awesome event goes down, and I never, and Ryan can attest this, I never usually tune into streams. I usually rewatch stuff or I'll hear about it, but I was too excited and I watched a majority of the streams. So yeah, my excitement levels are, at an all-time high for where the current game is and what the future is going to bring in the next coming months. But enough about me. Get to the meat and potatoes.
Yeah, hopefully that's the first and only time we hear from you for the duration of this video. But from now on, obviously, we're here with Levi and Sam. You guys, fans of the channel, are very familiar with them. Fans not only of the channel, but fans of Flesh and Blood. I feel like you guys have kind of transcended the channel now, and you guys have become just synonymous with Flesh and Blood, which is very, very cool to see and witness. But yeah, you guys did extremely well at the Chicago Brawl hosted by MinMax Games this previous weekend. It was fantastic. So I'm hoping to kind of dive into the event a little bit and pick your brains apart as to why you guys played two different heroes. Levi, you stuck with Tried and True, but kind of a new take on her, just because now it's very weird going from the bottom of the considered meta to now people are considering her a part of the triangle going forward, which is kind of crazy. And then Sam just kicking down the door and just saying, hey, here's Azuri. So it was a very exciting event to watch. I think I had more fun watching this event, not just because you two were doing so well, but just because you had Brody and you had Michael and you had these awesome featured players. And I feel like MinMax just did such a good job of always having, really awesome featured matches. And plus the new cards were I don't know. Have you guys heard of Codex of Frailty? Have you heard of that card?
Pretty good.
Okay,
I thought you were going to ask if I've heard of Isolate.
Oh yeah, that card too, yeah. But so those, just all the new cards featured. So I think MinMax just did a fantastic job, as they always do, of hosting and broadcasting an event. But I'm gonna start with Levi. Yeah. Because I feel like you're the most deserving of the start here, just because you've spent so much time and put in so many hours into Azalea. What have the new cards done for her, or what have they allowed for her that really she was not capable of doing before this set came out? Where do you feel, or how do you feel about these new additions like Premeditate and things like that?
It's just raised the power level really high, to the point where you can outrace pretty much every other aggro deck, and while still disrupting them. You still have the same bad matchups you did before in Oldham and Dromai, but the deck just feels like it runs over anything that can't disrupt you at all. Yeah, the deck just does a lot more than, or it does the same things it did before, just bigger numbers and more on hits.
I really want to kind of I want Codex of Frailty to kind of be its own discussion. I'm interested to hear both of your thoughts as they apply to your deck. But, what have cards like, Premeditate and the Laces, what have those added to Azalea? It's like, it's crazy to me because Azalea always had like really devastating on hits. Like if you're looking in terms of like hero powers, it's like her and Bravo. And she just had always like the most like, all she had to do was hit, whereas Bravo's devastating on hits were always crush effects. So you could like math it out a little bit differently. But I feel like the Laces have really kind of shaped, like you're adding multiple on hits. Not only is it just one giant arrow, hey, you're screwed if this hits. Now I feel like she's kind of become multi-layered with those different on hits. And then Premeditate is just, a god card in general. Would you agree with that kind of assessment that now she's kind of multi-layered instead of just, hey, you have one thing to worry about instead of now you have multiple things to worry about?
Right. So I think the biggest thing there is the fact that a lot of the new on hits that we have are like fundamentally different to what we used to have, because the old ones were just disruption, meaning it slowed down your opponent's turn, but they didn't actually do extra damage, or they didn't like things like Blood Rot or Premeditate, making Ponder tokens. They didn't generate value if your opponent just laid down their entire hand. So like you come in for 15, they lay down 12. Red in the Ledger isn't doing anything. Remorseless isn't doing anything. Hamstring Shot's not doing anything. Fatigue Shot's not doing anything. All those on hits don't matter at that point. Like you still get tempo, but you're not actually pushing damage. But now all of a sudden we have actual on hits of Blood Rot. We've got Ponder, which actually generates value across the turn cycles. So that's kind of the biggest difference. We also, now with having more buffs that have their own on hits, you're more incentivized to go tall, because each additional buff not only adds another on hit, but it also makes all the other on hits more likely to hit. So it puts your opponent in the position where they can't afford to let like 11 with 3 on hits land, but if they let it hit, they just can't do anything. Like you get so much value off the on hit. So your opponent used to be able to play through it. Now they can't afford to. They either have to lay down their hand or accept that you're getting a ton of value from it.
Yeah, it just seems like it's just so much more devastating than she used to be. The on hits were always like good and they were always great, but now I just feel like the stack and her ease of the Laces counting for 0, Premeditate coming in for like 0 cost. It's like she's so efficient, and yet the amount that she can do with a full grip or whatever is just so astronomical. Plus dominate on top of that. It just seems like she can steamroll. If she's rolling, she can steamroll. So it's like, it's almost as if the Ranger, and I'm kind of ignorant to Ranger playstyle, but like these types of multi-layered on hits and all these added cards almost make up for the Ranger deficiency of the potential dead hand, because her non-dead hands are so devastating that it could like almost make up for a potential dead draw later in the game. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems like just the amount of pressure and the amount of like Blood Rot for her, I feel like is almost like a godsend, because it's 2 damage on the opponent's turn on hit, and it's like making up itself for a potential dead draw later on, because you're still getting in extra damage as the game goes on.
Yeah.
I was going to ask.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
I was going to ask, like, because you brought up like ignorant to the Ranger playstyle, and I wanted to know if like the cards that you've added and the changes that you've made to your deck, has that changed the style that you're playing her? Like how have you gone from, like, in the past I knew you were very like you were very give and take. You would set up your turns. You'd still used to play your D-reacts, and you would play like a little cat and mouse game with your opponent. But do these new cards, did they like change the way that you are going about most of your matchups? Like, are you more headstrong now?
Yes, unfortunately. I don't enjoy that playstyle quite as much.
You're a blocker.
I do like blocking, but unfortunately, because of Codex of Frailty, D-reacts are a detriment when you draw them and you have a Codex of Frailty. Because you can't get it out of your hand easily, so you end up discarding the Codex instead of just getting a Pot of Greed. Mm-hmm. So that combined with what I was talking about before, where your on-hits are compounding, so each additional one makes all of the other ones more likely to hit. You just end up feeling, or it just ended up feeling like adding in more buffs instead of blocking was just overall stronger.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting and good to know.
But the ratios in the deck stayed basically the same as before. It's just defensive cards got replaced with buffs, and everything else stayed the same. And obviously, arrows got upgraded, buffs got upgraded.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you, Sam, we're going to get to you. But a final question here. How had the new token Quiver, how is that kind of, played into? Is it better than you thought? I know initially when it was spoiled, you're like, oh my God, this card's amazing. Is it on par with that? Is it just a nice kind of luxury to have? Like, what are you thinking about that?
It's not as strong as we thought it originally was. You're not actually using that effect very often. I probably used it the effect, I'd say 7 or 8 times across the entire event. But it takes 1 deck slot, and sometimes it turns your Deadeye into getting an entire extra card for a resource. Or you get 1 extra damage on an infecting shot, or 1 extra damage here on a drill shot piercing. So it's definitely worth the slot, but it's not like an all-star core part of the deck.
Okay, interesting. All right, before we get into kind of specific cards from the new set, I'm gonna kind of go over to Sam here. So Sam, you are the Briar main here, but also known for kind of innovating and taking kind of decks that people think are going to be trash and doing extremely well. This is your, first tournament in 5 years that you played in. So
Seems
it was
like it.
good to see. So you took Azuri. So I know you and Ben have been working on Azuri, and you shouted him out on the live broadcast. But I want to kind of pick your brain specifically now. Why did you just take her because you thought you wanted to play a new deck? Did you play it because you genuinely thought she had a good chance into the field? Why did you choose to play this literally a 12-hour hero into this massive important event?
It was for a couple of reasons. I think Uzuri, when I first saw her revealed and her hero ability, and before she came out, Arachne was very interesting to me. The assassin class aesthetically and just its playstyle was something I really gravitated to. And when she came out, it was kind of like what I was preparing with Arachne to be fully realized. I was very intrigued by her playstyle initially. It seemed to very much so resemble my playstyle. Her aesthetic was something I really enjoy. I'm a big metalhead. I really like dark, grim, just brutal stuff. And that was kind of her whole thing. So I was very drawn to her initially. But once I started playing her, that quickly depleted because I thought, wow, this hero is unplayable. Her power level is way below what it needs to be. Her ability to attack certain heroes like Oldhim are just impossible. And so I immediately just after about a few tries, was like, I don't really think there's much here. I went back to Briar and Katsu and tried to start working those out. But then I found Ben on Talishar and he beat me, and I was first thought it was a fluke, and then my other friend Brandon played into him on Dromai and he beat him too, and I watched the whole game. And so I scoured Discord, I found him, I messaged him and I said, hey dude, I think you have something actually viable here, and I think we can work on it and really get it tuned really well. And he was down for it, so we each independently were practicing and playing in many matchups, and we're constantly going back and forth, refining the list, trying different techs, and we were very in line with our perspectives on the deck, which I think really helped us progress because there wasn't many speed bumps when we were actually going. It was like, hey, how do you feel about this card? And we're both like, yeah, not performing well, underperforming. What do we need it to be? Well, it has to be 3-block. It has to be this, blah, blah, blah. And so it was a very streamlined process of us being able to refine this. He has many years of deck building experience. That's kind of his favorite thing. I like playing decks, and I like refining stuff and getting it to feel very in line with how I like to play. And so it was a really good match when we found each other. So more so in terms of the reasoning as to why I brought it, I think it was about a week and a half before the event, I'd kind of realized I don't think Katsu's going to cut it. I don't think Breyer's going to cut it. I think Uzuri actually has the best chance to tackle an open meta, specifically because because I was watching everyone. Nobody respected her. Nobody thought she was viable. Even somewhere in the back of my head, I didn't think she was viable, to be honest.
Right.
But I thought she had enough legs where I knew there was going to be a lot of Rangers there, and I felt good about my Ranger play. So I thought if only that, if I get to play into a lot of Rangers, then I feel good about my decision. So I had told that to him, and he said, all right, awesome. Let's get working on it then. Let's get it refined. So we really started to tune in on our matchups, our sideboarding, specifically each card. Because the other cool thing about Uzuri is that the deck is very core to its play pattern, and the sideboard is very supplemental, like an Assassin would be, where it's more so accessorizing how you want to add additions to your deck into different matchups, rather than completely transforming like Dash would be, or altering a play style in a certain way. So that was very fluid when we were testing out different tech cards or trying to decide how we wanted to develop specific game plans into heroes. And I felt very confident about my matchups into certain decks. And the ones that I knew that were going to be somewhat of a struggle, I felt confident that my skill gap and my matchup knowledge would be better than theirs. So I could probably edge out a win that way. And I think ultimately, like you mentioned, it being out for only 12 hours also helped me out infinitely, because most of the people I had sat down across, most of their experience was just roasting Uzuri's on Talishar.
Sure.
And they had no respect or thought it was good at all. And it was very surprising to them to see a deck that was overwhelming them. And I have always kind of described my playstyle as very erratic and disrespectful, and I think that is naturally inclined with how she plays. I described her as dirty, disabling, and psychologically damaging, and that's how I like to play the game naturally. So it was very much in tune with a lot of hard reading, being able to basically tell my opponent how they're going to play the game word for word, and they didn't really have any answers on how to play against it. And ultimately, it ended up being a really good decision for me. So I'm very happy with the list. I'm really, really happy for Ben and his success and his ability to construct really great decks, and also our partnership together, because I think that we have formed a really great unit, and I'm really looking forward to what we can come up with next, or how we improve upon it, because this was the easy part. Now moving forward with it being out in the open, now this is when it gets really hard, because people are going to be very prepared and teching for it and playing it. And I don't think Assassin necessarily shines the most when people are specifically trying to beat it. But I don't know if you're going to have enough sideboard space to be able to handle it, to be honest. So we'll see what happens.
Now the red shred that I noticed in the sideboard, is that a Ryan Wegner tech, or is that because notoriously you give me shit for my red shred affinity, but I just was, curious if that was a tribute to me or if that was an actual decision.
I mean, yeah, I've always think about you every time I play the game, but more so red shred. Shred in Uzuri is much better than it is in Arachne, because every card in your deck is shreddable. And what I mean by that is that when you play a stealth card that can be swapped into a CNC, for example, you have the ability to shred anything you want, because if they block with a card, it can be shredded, and then you Uzuri react in with a CNC or something. So shred is the universal best assassin reaction we have, because the other ones are restricted behind very specific. It has cut to the chase, has to be contract, and the other ones have to be stealth. And so there isn't much crossplay between them, but shred is universal. So red shred, yellow, and blue are some of your best punishment cards in the deck for sure, which is why we played almost the full rainbow, minus one blue. But, we can forget one blue.
For sure. All right. So I do, before we talk about kind of specific tournament play and things like that, and, how the tournament in general was, I do want to talk about one card specifically, and I hinted at it. You guys, I'm sure, have heard of this card and read it a couple of times. I feel like on stream, literally every other card that was played was the Codex of Frailty. I was talking with Levi a little bit about it. It's a card that I feel, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way, is very above curve. I think it's a meta defining and a meta shifting card. And I think that was kind of put on display this weekend. Granted, first tournament, 12 hours, whatever it was. So we could be over exaggerating, but I think that the power of Codex of Frailty was kind of on full display through the stream and for everyone that like saw it and you guys playing it. So I want to go into specifically what Codex of Frailty means for your deck. Why is it as strong as it is? And things like that. Levi, I'll kind of kick it off to you here to talk about just kind of the power level of Frailty and why it's stronger than the other two codices. I think initially when I read it, I was very excited for kind of Codex of Blood Rot because that kind of seemed like, hey, you get to strip a blocking card from their hand. But after talking to you guys and seeing things played, it's I think there's no question that Codex of Frailty not only is the best codex, or not only the best codex, but also I think inarguably probably the best card in the set and one of the best cards in the game. So Levi, go ahead, talk to me about that. I'm gonna step away for a second. I'll be right back. But
yeah, so I think you kind of summarized it there, where it's the best card. I think it's the best card in the set and probably one of the strongest cards still legal in the game. I don't know. The card is just insane. Traditionally in Azalea, we ran D-Reacts, we ran Snapdragons just so we could be defensive. And now all of a sudden, just by Codex of Frailty existing, sorry, I meant Perch Grapplers. I don't know if either way, we played Perch Grapplers before most of the time. I'm now playing Snaps into almost every matchup just because being able to Snapdragons when you have a Codex of Frailty in your hand is just way too much value. And I'm cutting D-Reacts because having a D-React with Codex of Frailty is bad. So it feels like the entire deck is like, or a lot of these old decision points are just getting warped because you want to maximize the value of that card. And when you build the deck in this way, you're almost always able to get 7 to 10 value for one card whenever you play Codex of Frailty, which is just an absurd number. Most of the cards that hit that like value range are very specific situations. Things like Art of War and Fi on a 5-card hand when you draw good cards, or like Awakening is something people are comparing it to when you're lower life. Like that was slightly better when you were lower life, but like just the raw value on Codex of Frailty is one in way above rate almost every time you see it. Almost to the point where it's usually worth more than 2 cards as a single card, which is a problem in and of itself. It doesn't give your opponent opportunity to play around it, really. A lot of decks that we talk about, these power cards, like Art of War. If Fi drew an Art of War and you go play a disruptive card, all of a sudden that Art of War is real bad because they don't get to play it freely. You have like Lexi with Rain Razors or 3 of a Kind. All of those cards, if you make them block, those cards are getting nowhere near the value that they were going to originally. The value, that ceiling on those cards was based on having like a 5-card hand or a very specific hand. And that's kind of one of the bigger issues with Codex of Frailty in my mind is the card is great in a 1-card hand, a 2-card hand, a 3-card hand, a 4-card hand, a 5-card hand. Like you can get that basically 2+ card value at any hand size at almost any game state. So it's never bad. It's just pretty much always good. There's fringe situations where it is only like on rate, but every other time it's just absurd. And especially into like the Ranger Mirror match right now, you're usually getting like 2 value off the Frailty token as well, because all of the attacks come out of the arsenal. Like I've had games against Lexi where it was like a 1-card 12 because they were planning on firing like 5 attacks, and I don't know, 1-card 12 that all I had to do was just draw it.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel healthy.
It's interesting to hear you say those words, because like obviously it's so fresh and new, but I think those are valid points. And then like Sam, would you agree? Doesn't feel healthy, or do you think it is like different depending on in your circumstance when you playing Azuri? Is it different? Did it feel any different, or do you feel the same way?
I think it's extremely excessive in Ranger, but necessary in Assassin. And I say this because Ranger has a lot of ways to extend their play lines and have very powerful turns, and then just exacerbate that with the Codex. But in Assassin, you don't really have a lot of bomb or power cards in the deck, and most of your power plays do revolve around Codex. But what you can even pull off a Codex is very limited in terms of singularity power. So most of the time, your Codex targets are going to be, most of the time, like if you have it, Death Touch, which is one of the most powerful cards that you have in play lines in the deck. But even then, right, like that's a 6 power card, that's 1 resource, which is very powerful with a very strong on hit. But comparing that to an arrow that can just be maximized or blown out or extended beyond what their first 15 damage arrow was producing is pretty different, because also like, you have to also look at the 2 different varieties of how the decks are using the card itself. So like within Azuri, you're really trying to utilize it as like an extender, but also a disruptor, but also kind of like as a punish card, which changes depending upon the circumstance of what's in your graveyard and what your opponent has done to defend you in that point. Like you can get a Leave No Witness when they have had to arsenal another card and discard a card, so that you can minimize their potential on their turn, and then put them in another punishing situation with the Leave No Witness, where the card they got is then risking getting blown out, or they have to block with another card from hand. But that's like almost the extent of your power turn. Like before you did that, you probably played like an E-Strike with Go Again, or a Rabble, or something like that. Or if on like a super big turn, maybe you popped like your boots, so you got Go Again to do it. But on average, it's like a Death Touch, which is a 6 attack that can be an 8 value if you get a Blood Rot or something like that. So, but without Codex of Frailty, Death Touch almost becomes like pretty bad in the deck. Like just having to arsenal it and then play it drastically reduces its power, and that is one of the most powerful cards in the deck. So like without Codex of Frailty, you are like really minimizing your power plays to be able to strike your opponent. But with Ranger, it really feels like a massive extender. It's like it's not necessary. It's like you have all this insane power prior to it, and then you just like unload this massive amount of power beyond it too, where you're even forcing your opponent to not even be able to block your secondary on hits. In Ranger, it feels like it creates uninteractive circumstances, but in Assassin, it feels like a necessary finisher to be able to maximize your potential power of the deck. Because without it, you really don't have a lot of big power plays.
Well, that was really well put.
At least thank you.
No, from the both of you. I mean, as someone who watched the tournament, and obviously I would consider myself more like casual, I'm sitting there like watching this card get played, and I'm like, man, I guess like, you know, I read the card the first time, and I'm seeing it in action now in Levi's deck, I'm seeing it in your deck, and then I'm like thinking to myself like, okay, man, everybody's talking about this card, I want to know why. It's such it's everywhere. It's what I'm seeing constantly. And then to hear the two of you explain how you both feel that it fits to your class of hero and why was really informative. So appreciate that. It looks like I'll take over until Ryan, who, for the viewers, does have like an infant daughter and another child as well. So I think he's on Fab Dad duties. If you watch the stream, they were talking about Fab Dads. And so Ryan's definitely a Fab Dad, so he's probably gone somewhere. But let's like actually talk about like the event then, as far as like what you guys were seeing at the event and what you prepped for with these new characters, and it being the first like major tournament to happen in the Outsiders like meta. Do you feel like what, I guess the question is like, what you prepared for, was it presented in a way to where like, oh, okay, I thought there was going to be a lot of Dromai, and there was, or I thought there was going to be a lot of so-and-so, and maybe some classes that you felt like, Sam, you would struggle into, and then Levi, I know we had talked prior, you had said before that a lot of your bad matchups are still the same. most of your matchups are the same. It just had increased your deck's power level. So I guess I'll ask Sam first. What were you most, hesitant to walk into? And I know you had brought up Oldhim. You think he's going to be able to adjust and adapt. But, what matchups do you consider, extremely favorable or ones that you needed to put in extra practice to really master?
Yeah, I mean, the two matchups that were by far the most difficult are Oldhim and Dromai. I'd probably put Dromai above Oldhim, just because Assassin inherently has a really difficult time being able to maintain board state and threaten Dromai simultaneously, mainly because none of your attacks or on hits get triggered from dragons, so you are always wasting value to try to clear dragons. So you try to have to rely on dagger pressure to be able to clear efficiently, and then also you need to most likely have a go again attack to clear a dragon and then threaten the Dromai. So we tried fatigue strategies, and that ultimately just ended up being kind of useless after a while. I mean, sometimes you could get it, but if the Dromai was very good or just got out of control with Miragi pressure and getting what's the blue aura that has lack of phantasm on it? Haze bending? No, not haze bending.
I can't remember the name either.
Passing Mirage.
Yeah, yes. Passing Mirage. Yeah, yes. That one. Yeah, it's super, super hard to get past a Passing Mirage. So you had to just try to kill Dromai. So that was definitely the hardest one. I figured there was going to be a lot of Dromais because in Chicago people love Illusionist. I think just generally people love Illusionist, but in our area there's so many Dromais. So I kind of just had figured. I had a game plan how to beat it, and you kind of needed some things to go your way, but I just conceded that if I hit a Dromai, whatever was going to happen was going to happen. Oldhim, although it was difficult, we felt like we had a pretty solid game plan into it with Scale Peeler and Vambrace Pressure, which you can watch my stream game and watch that match. And I think it was a pretty good display of how the game plan is supposed to work and play out. We just didn't have enough time to fully enact the game plan, which was one of the risks of it. Another matchup that is pretty difficult is Kano. For a lot of decks, you just have to concede that matchup is going to go the way it goes. The one benefit that I have as Zuri is that we have a lot of Arsenal pressure, so it's very difficult for Kano to maintain an Aether Wildfire in Arsenal, which is exactly what happened, actually. I had to play against a Kano who was undefeated round 4, who's a really great guy who I actually knew from Wisconsin because we've played some events prior to, and super nice guy. And I was able to pull that out just because I actually high rolled a number of times and did what I had to do. I was able to blow out an Aether Wildfire in his arsenal that he got turn 1, and so that extended my life for a long enough time to be able to make him unable to kill me. He was off by 2. If I played that matchup again, he probably would have won. But the rest of the matchup spread, you could see my matchups that I had played throughout the day, and I didn't play one hero twice until top 8, where I had to play the same dash that I played round 7. I played 8 different heroes throughout the course of the tournament.
That's awesome.
And I think that was a great testament to Azuri's flexibility and her strength to be able to tackle a open, wide meta, because she's kind of like the mid-range queen. It's very hard to contest her in a mid-range game state, I feel like, because she's very powerful with 2-card hand, 1-card hand, 3-card hands, and people have described it as disruptive, but I don't really see her power or her ability as disruptive as it is more so disabling, because it's very targeted in terms of how you're trying to stop your opponent from being able to pressure you. So she's very strong into aggro. I had to play against Lucas Oswald for the first round. He was on Briar. He's a very accomplished young player who I've been following since Orlando Nationals, which was almost 2 years ago at this point. But he usually plays Oldhim. So one of my big surprises of the event actually was I figured there was going to be a lot more Oldhim than there was. And a lot of the state-of-the-art Oldhim players that you would think, like Lucas himself, for whatever reason, just did not pick it because they were fearful that people were very targeted with having a fatigue Oldhim plan. So he opted for a deck like Briar instead. And I think ultimately that was very good for me, but something that I definitely did not expect. I expected there was going to be a lot more Oldhim than there were, but people were just kind of, being that it was a brand new meta and they figured people were preparing for fatigue Oldhim, they kind of opted to stay away from that, which I don't know if it was the right decision, but it was a very good meta decision for me because I suspected there was going to be a lot of Rangers, and that ended up being the case too. So it was very interesting in the spread. People wanted to play with the new toys and were a little scared of their comfort picks. because they figured people were also going to be prepared for that. But ultimately, I think that the meta was very diverse, and I feel like there was a lot of heroes that were performing well from across the whole spectrum, but from aggro to mid range to control and everything in between as well.
Yeah, I thought so too. Like when I saw just the testament of you playing 8 different heroes is pretty incredible and amazing. And so I flipped that same question over to you, Levi, if because I'm sure a lot of people are going to be jumping onto the Azalea train, playing and testing her for the first couple of times, and then going through matchups that you've played countless times to get the experience and get to the point to where you have a comfortable feel into every matchup. Do you feel like now that the heroes changed moving forward, what are you most hesitant of, and what could slow down like Azalea from being a key piece moving forward? Or what matchups do you kind of put a little bit more time into to get the feel for?
It's still Oldhim and Dromai. They're matchups where it also comes down to how the Oldhim and Dromai are built. The more defensive they are, the harder it gets. So like the Empress Dromais, the red line aggro with their 0 for 4s, like that matchup is not bad at all. I think it's probably Azalea favored because they can't develop a board and then slow down the game because they don't have the blocking tools to slow it down enough. Whereas the Dromais that are very difficult are the ones that are running like all 3 blocks, all the D-reacts, sand covers, maybe even Oasis or Spites, and they'll just lay down a dragon and then sit there and poke for 3 every turn and block their entire hand. Or anytime you take time to clear dragons, they'll play more dragons, and you don't have the same reach that you would against like a red line Dromai, because sometimes they can just block 10 on a dominate and you didn't actually push damage.
Mm-hmm.
And then Oldham's weird. I think the mid-range lists are a lot closer than they used to be. We can keep up just fine. The full fatigue where they've got the healing and stuff in it, I have not been able to find a good answer for it. It's definitely better than it was before, but I think it was almost 0% before, so I'm not sure where it's at right now, but still nervous about sitting down across from Oldham's.
So then,
and then,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No.
I was gonna say, the rest of the meta I'm pretty comfortable into. After playing against Sam, Azuri's a scary matchup. I still think it's slightly Azalea favored, but it also comes down to how many defensive tools you have in your sideboard. Like I know a lot of Azaleas were on almost no D-reacts, and I think that would be kind of an issue. Then you'd be basically playing like Lexi into Azuri, where you can't do anything about their Azuri ability.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, most of the other things in the meta, I feel either even or favored into. Anything aggressive, they can't slow me down enough, or they can't stop my damage.
That's such a cool world we live in now. It's like gonna be the Wild West with like everything running, counters to counters and people adapting and adjusting. And as things start to shake out, like Sam said, he thinks it's only going to get more difficult for Azuri because now that it's there, people can then prepare and get more familiarized. And then, like, now that Azalea has put a stamp on this past event, people are going to start prepping and preparing, and it's just going to get a little bit more harder from there as well. So it'll be interesting to see how things shift moving forward. To catch you up, Ryan, as you were, I told the audience you probably were on Fab Dad duties, but
strep throat, am I right?
Yeah, there you go. We had spoken about how Codex was different into the different heroes, how it felt in each one, which you'll have to go back and watch that because I felt like the two of them did an excellent job explaining how it's different in each way, and both these gentlemen are so well spoken. It makes me feel like, gee, I can tell why I'm just an average player when I talk to these guys. And then, we recently spoke on, they're more hard matchups, and what they were prepping for is in a sense of like if someone was to try to get into these heroes or for that past event, like what decks did it take a little bit more practice into in case they had ran into? But that's where we left off. So I'll bounce it back over to you, my good sir, if you have anywhere else you'd like to take this conversation.
Yeah, I want to talk to Sam real quick as, the Azuri new deck kind of thing. I've completely copied your list here. I know early on you and I were kind of bouncing ideas off of each other. We are on a very similar intelligence level when it comes to Flesh and Blood. I'm sure if I played this event, I probably would have top 3 as well, or top 4 as well. But anyway, so 2 of the cards that I really want to kind of focus on. Number 1 is a Dando special with Nimblism. But number 2, I really want to talk about Vambrace of Determination, because when it was first spoiled, I think myself especially, and I think largely the community looked at this and was like, this is the Crown of Seeds. Like, this is the answer here. Like, obviously, this is LSS's way of whatever. And we were kind of like, whatever. And then I watched your Oldham matchup. You eventually tied, which was travesty. It was such bullshit because you would have won. Sorry, LSS. But anyway, and Vambrace did work. And so I want to know, is this a card where, do you think Oldhams are going to play around it in the future? Obviously, we know that the new Light Illusionist is going to come out next set, right? So we think that new ways of prevention are gonna exist. So obviously, this is a card that is just going to scale well over time. But you showed it in your Oldham match. You did work with this card. So do you think this is a staple? Do you think this is a card that you can see getting swapped out of Azuri? And then after you talk about that, I'd like you to touch on Nimblism a little bit, because Nimblism is like I said, it's such a Dando card, where when I'm building a deck, I don't think of Nimblism. I think of like all the other cards, and I just feel like every time you send a deck or I see a deck list from you, Nimblism is always there. And so I want to know the importance of Nimblism in Azuri specifically, but start with Vambrace for me.
Sure. So Vambrace was an interesting card.
Yeah.
I mean, I initially was playing it in Katsu for the Oldham matchup, thinking that it would improve, and I was finding it to be very lackluster, because you have to trade one resource for their one resource, and their one resource almost infinitely was always more valuable than yours, because all you were netting was 1 Kodachi damage, which was basically nothing in the long scale of things. And when Ben and I were trying to determine what was the best approach for Oldham, he was definitely more so encouraging that Vambrace, he thought, was the plan. Just because playing a red line list, any bit of damage that you can punch through was pretty valuable. And our first implication was, well, we don't have a lot of floating resources, but it at least allows us to play around Ice React as well. So that was another consideration, was if we get Ice Reacted, at least we can Vambrace to clear the card out of our hand. So that was another one. But then once we came across Scale Peeler, that was when it kind of all clicked, and we're like, okay, because now we're not just trading one resource for 1 damage. We're trading one resource for 2, maybe even more value, where it's not even about the value. It's more about the disabling factor, like I had mentioned before. Because Azuri on face value in Fab, you can really, prior to her, I think, you could probably get a really good gauge of the quality of a card basing it upon its value. So when I say that, it's like, for 1 resource, you get this much damage or this much blocking or something. But Azuri is a little bit more ethereal in that sense, where it's like you could look at like a Talishar stats page and it doesn't look impressive at all based on like damage output or average turns, but like that doesn't really tell the full story. So like Scale Peeler with Vambrace completely disables Oldham from playing his normal play pattern, because now you no longer allow him to use Crown of Seeds as a viable way to block your initial dagger. You no longer allow them to use Rampart to block it, because your dagger now has piercing, so we'll get over that. You also now, if this hits, disable them from allowing them to block with Rampart and Crater Fist, because I was hoping there was a point in the match where he grabbed his Crater Fist to block, and I was so excited, because if he blocked with that, Scale Peelers would make it 1, and then it would get the 1 counter on it, and then when it leaves the chain, it would recognize it's at 0 and it would get destroyed. So now it disables them from allowing them to use Crater Fist as well as a blocking proponent. So it completely shuts off what Oldham is usually comfortable with playing around certain play patterns, which kind of blew the doors open for us, because at that point, then we were just like, if you just keep pressuring him and hammering him, it will get to a point where he no longer is allowed to be able to block Scale Peelers unless he gives you cards or has Earth React. So Vambrace, I think, is on its face not really that great, but if it's combined with an effect that exponentially nets you additional value throughout the course of the match, then it's extremely powerful. Not to mention it's in the Oldham match, it's super important to have a really strong second cycle pitch stack, which you can watch my game back and watch how considerately I was pitch stacking. And Vambrace also adds to that, where it's allowing you to construct your second cycle even more specifically to how you want to do it. So going forward, it's definitely still the best plan into Oldham, I think. In terms of its generic value across the board in other decks, I think it needs to be paired very specifically with additional value to on hits to really get its greatest, to maximize its potential. But yeah, going forward with Ward and the other prevention illusionist abilities, I think it might cement itself to having a better effect throughout the long term of the game. But right now, I think it kind of is in a weird niche spot where it has very particular places in some decks, but a lot of times, like Breaking Scales or Bullseye Bracers, just overall are just better. I think that those just are better effects than what Vambrace will do for you. In regards to Nimblism, that was a card that also was proposed by, well, actually, I proposed it to Ben very early on, and he was like, nah, I don't really think it's that good. And then he put it in the deck, and he's like, dude, Nimblism is the truth. You got to play Nimblism. And this was around the time when we were kind of curving the deck to have better overall play and more impact in regards to our cards singularly being powerful. So when I look at decks or when I build decks, I want cards to independently be powerful, and then exponentially be more powerful when in combination with other cards. So if you look at our stealth cards that we picked, we don't have Infiltrate, we don't have Malign, we don't have these other stealth cards that single-handedly don't really do a lot. But with like what the ones we have like the best of the best, where when they're paired with a Nimblism, now this 3 attack that would give you an inertia, like Sedate, for an example. If you do that for 6, that automatically becomes a massive on hit that can become very disruptive and is much more difficult to block. Along with the fact that you can combo it with E-Strike, which you saw me do all the time against that Oldham match where I was swinging 10 at him, which was massive. And then you can also, my favorite play is where if you have a Codex and a Nimblism, you Nimblism, Codex a Death Touch for 9. And that was crazy. Like when we found that, we were like, that's a huge blowout play. So it's one of those cards that enhances the singularity power of cards that maybe on face value aren't as strong, but then become threats, massive threats on their own. In addition to that, also like another great combo or finisher that you found was with Isolate in combination with Nimblism. We closed out so many games with just like having an Isolate with a pitch stack of Nimblism, Isolate, Razor's Edge for 9 Dominate. Like I've won so many games that way. So it's just one of those cards that is flexible and allows your on face value weak cards to all of a sudden become very threatening and very strong in their own right. One of the biggest things with the deck is we really wanted to minimize the 2-block cards that we had, because we found that having too many 2-blocks in Uzuri was just not sustainable and was not efficient in the long run. So we really had to prioritize and value our 2-block cards to be really good. And Nimblism just kind of stuck the course and ended up really paying off and being much more valuable in the long run from its power level of just how it enhanced other cards. So very different than like in Briar, for example, but in its own right, created very deadly on hits, which is kind of what the deck needs, I feel like, to be able to combat a large array of heroes.
One of the things that I've been meaning to ask you, and this is just going off of your 2 stream games, and I do want to get you guys' kind of thoughts on like your matchup, because it was as a fangirl of the 2 of you, it was very fun to see the 2 of you match up on stream. And so I'd like to get kind of your insights and like, you know, just how you approach that. But Sam, I've been meaning to kind of message you, Flick Knives. I notice in a lot of your games, you don't necessarily use the ability where you're keeping your daggers, and especially against Levi and like an aggro matchup like that, are you saving the Flick Knives ability for late game? Because you're not attacking with your daggers, you're blocking out, and then you're usually sending like a stealth attack or a Nimblism or an E-Strike or something like that. So you're never really dagger attacking. So why not try to chip in damage early, or is that your end game against him? That's kind of something that I've been meaning to ask you. Like, is that your closer, or why not chip in damage early when you can, while you have it active, and then you can block with it and destroy it later on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Flick Knives is very utility based, how we play it. At its face, it's just an Iron Rock Gauntlet, to be honest. I mean, just like having a one block is pretty powerful, but with the ceiling of being much more value orientated. So I'm usually playing Nerve Scalpel, and if I'm playing into decks that I'm prepared for D-Reacts, you can flick the Nerve Scalpel in response to the D-React, which will neg the D-React down to a 3 block if it's a sync, for example. And now this Flick Knives will net you 2 value, or even more, because a lot of times you're hitting breakpoints that will allow your on hits to then deal damage. Another way that I utilize Flick Knives is when you get to an end game state and you're going to get your opponent down to 3 health, for example. Like, I've done this many times where I'm going to attack with a Death Touch and they block 3 and they go down to, let's just say they're going to go to 3. I'll Flick Knives them. I'll give them a Blood Rot. So now they're at 2 with a Blood Rot. So now they're under lethal. So it completely shuts off their next turn to where they can't play it how they want, or they're just going to die. So there's very utility-based reasons for the card. And some matchups, I will just throw a knife just to get a damage when I'm planning to just block with the card, just to net that extra damage value. But a lot of times, it's the existence of the card being a threat is also very powerful, but it serves very minute advantages, which is what Assassin really wants to get. You want the game to go a little bit longer. You want to try to net as many minor advantages as you can throughout the course of the game. And I think Flick Knives is really good in that regard. And then if you don't care, like, whatever, just it's a 1 block. 1 blocks are good. Granted, it's very expensive comparative to Iron Rot. So if you don't have it, just play Iron Rot Gauntlet. But the throwing the daggers is very impactful in certain situations and can win you games for sure. Like, it's definitely worth it, in my opinion, even if you're not like using multiple dagger-esque abilities. And the reason why we're not swinging daggers is because we're playing a red line build. I mean, you swing the dagger when you can, but the deck is not focused around the power of the dagger. It's more so focused around the power of Azuri's hero ability.
Do you think a dagger deck exists?
Oh, no, they definitely exist. I just don't think they're really that good at this point.
Okay.
There's 3 Azuri lists that I've seen. It's the Dagger list, the Red Line list, and then the Arachne cosplay list. Yeah, where they all have different purposes. I think they all serve certain weaknesses, and I ended up on the Red Line list because I think it has a much stronger matchup spread across the board, and it just innately is a more powerful deck than the other ones because of the combos that are within the deck itself.
Cool. So... yeah. Jim, I do have a question for you after I get to a question here. But I do want to talk to you guys because your top 4 matchup on stream, just knowing you two, I was so hoping this matchup would take place. I was so excited to see you guys play. And just knowing that you guys operate at a machine gun pace was very fun to watch. So going into the matchup, Levi, like, what are you... Like, I don't know what your preparation was against Azuri. I'm sure you guys kind of jammed, going into the event. Maybe I could be assuming, but what are you, as the Azalea player, as the potential, top player in the meta, as Azalea, what were you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to force, Sam to do, or what are you trying to do in that matchup to throw him off of his game plan and eventually win the match?
So current version of Azalea doesn't really want to block. So kind of the first thing that I was planning on doing was avoiding Arsenal when it was viable. Because a lot of the things that he'll be swapping into, like Leave No Witnesses and CNC, are targeting my Arsenal. And if I don't have an Arsenal, I don't have to be as worried about that. Also putting in D-Reacts, because that gives you... They end up just being really high value because all of his on hits are so impactful. Whether that's destroying a card in Arsenal, taking a card out of your hand. So having that ability to play D-Reacts is important. But when I don't have them, just avoid having an Arsenal to try and minimize the impact of his effects. We're also trying to go through the deck quickly to find Codex of Frailty, because that card's really good. And yeah, That was basically it. I was trying to play my game as best I could and not let him control the pace of the game, which is where the not arsenaling comes in order to make it so I don't have to respect his on hits as much.
It's this like weird chess match of like on hits versus on hits. So like, what on hits against his are you most? If you're not arsenaling, like what on hits on like from Missouri are you most like worried about?
If I don't have an arsenal, it's just shakedown, right?
Yeah. So that's like you don't care about blood rot, you don't care about like death touch or anything like that.
I mean, I can.
How impactful is like inertia against you?
It's a little bit awkward, but it's not the end of the world. Most of those effects I can play through, and Azalea's cards are just so much more potent offensively that I would much rather not block if my hand fits that game plan.
Sam, as an Missouri player now going into this new meta against potentially an Azalea-dominated world, what are you hoping to accomplish? Like, what's your game plan into the matchup?
I mean, I haven't really played it as much as I'd like to play it. On like maybe around 10 games that I have played, I don't really like the matchup is kind of fun, but it's not really fun for how I like my matchups to be. It's like uninteractive interactive. It's like you both are trying to you don't want the opposing player to play the game. So the Azalea player is just trying to smack massive arrow on hits that are netting massive blood pox or that are getting dead eye shots to rip cards from your hand. And you're trying to disable them from taking their key pieces so that they don't shoot you with massive arrows. So it's kind of like a chess game, kind of like cat and mouse. But in my mind, it's just kind of like a uninteractive slap fest. So, and that kind of nets certain variance points that come into it, like Codex of Frailty being one of them, which is super impactful in the matchup. But otherwise, I'm just trying to stop him from playing the game. I mean, it's that simple. It's like, I want to shake him down. I want to rip arrows out of his hand. I want to disrupt his arsenal. I want to get value out of my death touches. I'm trying to maximize blocking hands so I can block with 3 cards and leave no witness, or have a lot of defensive capabilities and then threaten good 2-card, 1-card hands. And that's about it. I mean, there's not like a ton of other agency that you can have in the matchup because you more so are the one who's getting assaulted and you're trying to like sneak jabs underneath while they're assaulting you to stop them from doing that. That is my early impression of the matchup. Obviously, I could play it a lot more and see if there's certain edges that can be found within it. But a lot of it really does seem to come down to draw patterns, Codex of Frailty, and then how many times the Azalea bricks and how many times you're able to shake them down. That's how it feels for me, at least from the offset.
So you guys might have answered this before. Go ahead, Levi.
No, I was going to say that's a pretty good assessment of the matchup. It's like, I had something I was going to say, and now I completely forgot it. Oh, well, go ahead.
You guys might have answered this while I was away, but Frailty, do you think, not now, not tomorrow, is this a card that you think is going to be on an LSS watch list of potential hits in the future?
I think so. I think it's the strongest card in the set and one of the most powerful cards currently legal. So if anything was to get hit, it would be Codex of Frailty. We did answer partly before, but just due to not having much counterplay and the card being too flexible.
Sure. Jim's listening to Red Hot Chili Peppers over there.
No,
it's his dad, dude. Let his dad rock.
Exposing me for being in the Rent's basement, but dude, my dad slaps on the guitar, bro. The amount of times that I'm trying to go to sleep and this dude's just jamming.
Nice.
It's insane.
I think the card is.
Oh, go ahead, Sam.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Jim. No. I was just gonna do a quick thing of like a lot of the cards that you've seen banned in the game are cards that are single-handedly powerful, and they try to ban cards surrounding other problematic cards first before banning that particular card. I think Codex of Frailty is very difficult to manage though because it targets every card that you could have in the grave. So you have to like rip many cards out of the game for it to have less of an impact before you'd have to ban that card. So I think design inherently is very difficult to manage outside of like banning the card itself.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I don't think it's not going to get hit anytime soon. But I definitely can see it being a card like it's almost. I'm not going to say Duskblade-esque, but it's very much like, hey, how did this thing like? If it was just add a card from the grave to your arsenal, cool. But with the added discard, a forced discard on top of the frailty token, on top of the ponder token, it just seems like it just enables a ton. I love the card. It's a very cool card. I'm glad you guys were able to showcase it. But yeah, it wouldn't be a surprise for me if this is eventually a target down the line. But it's definitely meta shaping, which is really, really cool. I mean, it's a. I'm glad that it exists for now because it's fun to play with, but it just seems cracked.
You know,
I mean,
half
of the top 8 was playing 3 copies of it. I'm pretty sure. So, just saying.
It was literally like, hey, back forth. It was like there was like certain times in the stream where it was like Codex of Frailty, this card, and then a pass. Okay, I'm gonna do this, and then Codex of Frailty. And it was like people played it multiple times. It was nuts. Levi? Did you say everybody in the top 8 was playing multiple copies?
No.
Not
half of the top 8.
The people that were eligible
and 2 azaleas. I think everyone's running max copies.
The people that were eligible to play max copies were playing max copies.
I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't be playing max copies if you're eligible to.
Yeah.
So Hamilton wasn't playing max copies.
I mean, he was playing max copies, but max copies is 0 in Icelander. So
sure. So everybody that was allowed to play 3 Codex of Frailties in the top 8 of a card that existed for 12 hours was playing max copies of Codex of Frailty, even though it had only existed for 12 hours.
They should have been. I'm double checking on the Lexi.
Hey,
look, 3 Codex of Frailties. Never would have guessed.
He's got 3? Crazy.
Yeah.
Why is Blood Rot and Inertia not like? Why aren't they that? Do you think they're good? Like, do you think they're below power level, or I mean, obviously they're not frailty levels of cracked, but do you think Fairy Tale Land frailty gets hit tomorrow? Do Blood Rot and Inertia see play?
Yes.
Okay. Oh no, and we got a no over here too.
I mean, it depends on the deck, but
not an assassin.
Yeah, probably not an assassin, but in Ranger, most likely. So the reason Rangers aren't playing many more, I know some Lexis are going up to like 5 or 6 codexes total, is that playing multiple is bad because the second ponder is not getting full value.
Yeah.
So right now, Azalea is playing 3 premeditates and 3 Codex of Frailties because you don't want them to overlap. If you start adding in other codexes, all of a sudden you risk not getting full value out of them. If we didn't have Codex of Frailty, Codex of Blood Rot is perfectly fine. Or Codex of Inertia. The problem with Inertia is you don't know what's on top of your deck, and if you can't play the card out of your arsenal, then you don't get value out of the Ponder. That's again why Frailty is so good, because you know exactly what's going into your arsenal, and you know you'll be able to play it. So I think the others would see play, but right now, because of stacking Ponders being inefficient, they won't see play while Frailty's legal, or at least not in anywhere near the quantities that you would expect.
Makes sense.
Jim, what were you going to say?
It was not about the Codex of Frailty or Blood Rot, but it was just more or less, I wanted to say that I obviously am biased, but I enjoyed your game with one another just based on the fact that you could see the amount of times that the two of you have played one another. And I have, obviously knowing the two of you guys and like seeing you exchange, I was like picturing myself being in a seat there with you guys and being like, oh man, this is how they play. Like, they know each other, they know their lines, they know what they're trying to do, they know what they want to do to each other. And like, even when you're listening to DM or anybody who is commenting, they're like, oh, these guys are going at lightning speed, do they know there's not a timer? And I'm like, no, this is two boys throwing cards, man. Like, this is them in their element. This is what the kids live for. It was really cool. It was so cool. It was electric.
It was cool.
It was like Ryan said, it was really fun tournament to watch. And like your matchup, obviously I'm biased because you guys are around us and we know you guys, but I was like so enthralled, and I just felt like the two of you having that that presence with one another allowed for that kind of like open air environment of like chucking tokens at each other and being like, nah, you take this, and it was pretty cool. And did you guys have a chance to test one another prior, or did you go into it kind of like, oh, Sam, you were doing your own testing and Levi was doing his own testing?
We mostly tested on our own, but I think we'd gotten 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, it was like 4 games. It was mostly I asked him to play some games like a week before the tournament just to see if my idea was absolute crap or if it had some legs. And I beat him a few times and I was like, yeah, good enough. So that was it, though. We tested independently for most of our time. We only had like maybe a handful of games.
That's awesome and really cool.
Yeah,
Welshman.
Before the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ryan.
No, you're more important than me. Go ahead.
Oh, well, no, I just have a lot of people asking me. So I just want to, like, they're like, why are you guys playing so fast? And my response to them is, we were playing slow for you. So if you guys are thinking that was fast, that's nothing. I mean, we literally talked before the match and we're like, so should we slow it down for the general public so they can actually keep track of what's going on? And we said, sure. So that was a courtesy to the rest of the viewers, but usually we play much quicker than that.
I've seen you guys play in person without like any cameras around, and I can confirm that I was like I was able to follow along, and yeah, that was nothing.
We'll like play a tally shot game, and then the end game timer is like 4.5 minutes or something.
Yeah, exactly.
You took 2.5 of that? What are you doing?
Yeah, that's 2 minutes too long.
Like, I think people need to understand that Levi and I, in the general public, I think people know that we're friends. We've known each other for a long time, but I don't think people understand that we have been playing card games with each other for over 10 years now, and most of our time playing them is in bulks of like 3-5-hour sessions where we are just grinding games back to back to back to back.
Yeah.
So, those times, that has played largely into our own play style, I think, but also in our games, it's nothing personal. It's nothing like different. It's just another day in the office. And I know some people are commenting saying we should have played slower. We should have been more methodical. But I don't think they understand that like that was slower. That was methodical. Like that was how we play at a normal tournament pace with one another. So yeah. I just want that to be known because I've gotten a lot of comments about it.
And also like if you know how to play the game, if you know what you're watching, if you know like flesh and blood, like I was watching it live. Even if I didn't know you two, like I know the game well enough, I knew what was going on. Like you guys were making plays. I knew the cards. I knew what was going on. So like I knew what was at stake. I knew the block. Like it wasn't like, oh my God, these guys are like assholes playing so fast. Like they need to slow down. They're going to miss things. No, like, dude, if you know what's going on, like it's not that difficult. Like even when I play Armories, I'm half as smart as Levi, double as smart as Sam, but I'm like, I'm not taking 30 minutes a turn. I'm not dissing Mr. Brody, who had a potty break in between his game, but like if you can think about it, if you know what's going on, right? It's not difficult. You guys know each other. You trust each other. You guys are, I don't know. It was fun to watch. I followed along. And my attention span is that of a chipmunk. So getting flack and things like that, I think, is unwarranted. I would rather watch your game, that pace, 1,000 times than watch Hamilton and Brody. And I enjoyed watching Hamilton and Brody, but I'm not going to watch that match again. I've watched you guys play 3 times already, which is a testament to
watching you play 3 times is like less than one of their games.
Yeah, it took me 12 minutes, but it's like I would watch that pace over and over again and study. If I want to watch Azalea, I'm going to watch that matchup and I'm going to watch what you do there. If I want to watch Azuri, I'm going to watch Sam's play during that matchup. Whereas like live, it was great to watch Brody and Michael do their thing. But I'm never going to go back and watch that matchup again to learn Azalea. If you know what I'm kind of saying or getting at, I enjoy the faster pace.
that's a good transition because I know Levi, he has really nice. I mean, for what Brody, I love that kid. Like, he is such a talented guy, super nice. I would do a lot for that kid. He is very talented, and I think he has a really bright future, not just in Flesh and Blood, but just in life in general. I wish the best upon him. And I know Levi has had some really great things to say in regard to some of the responses for his slow-esque play. I've talked to him personally about it as well. But Levi, can you just share what you have shared with me and the general public about his pace of play? Because I think it is good to be addressed as well.
I wish I could play at that pace because I would play so much better. It's a pleasure watching Brody play anytime. He'll sit down and he thinks through all his lines. I go on instinct and get the right line like 90% of the time. The problem is that 10% of the time I miss another line because I play quickly and I make my decisions quickly. And I don't have the patience to sit there and count my grave. In my top 8 game, I almost just cast a knock the death whistle to see what was in my grave or in my deck because I was too lazy to count my grave. And 90% of the time, that's what I'll do. Which is not correct. You count your grave. But I was like, there's like 60 cards in there. And I got to figure out what the last 9 are in my deck. Like, that's so much work. I could just play a card and save some time. Or even...
Well, you know, we're old. We only have so much bandwidth, right? You know? He's got like how many years of things that he has to remember, right? He's got this.
How old is he? 19?
17.
17, dude.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Or in the finals when I played my line and I said, okay, I got a blind Azalea here. And I went for it. And then he counted up, okay, there's 2 different ways to Azalea to try and close this game. So then he calculated exactly what the odds were on one line and exactly what they were on the other line and determined that the Bracers Spire Sniping line had better odds. And I would have picked one and gone for it because I'm not patient. And so, like, it's cool to watch him play and just go, wow, he's taking the time to think through all these possibilities, even possibilities that I rule out immediately. He's going to reevaluate because sometimes there are better plays that you just don't see at first glance. So he makes the most of untimed matches and makes sure that he has the time, so he's going to use it efficiently. And that's what you should do. I just don't have the patience for it, so I don't do it.
I agree. I mean, there's no disrespect to Brody. Like, he's a god in this game, and he's cool. I've never met the kid, but he's fun to watch. I really enjoy watching his games. It is. I don't have the patience, like you said. I don't have the ability. I don't have the. I'm decent at math, but other than that, there's a lot of
guesstimations going on.
Yeah, he's a freak. I look at it. I'm like, yeah, this looks good to me. I'm gonna do this, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, I have no problem with the slow play. I especially in untimed matches, especially for money, especially for a PTI. Like, you're doing your thing. Like, dude, like, take your time. I'm cool with that.
And yeah,
on that note, Brody, play faster.
Yeah, Brody, play faster, bro. Like,
Brody, play faster, though. You're really boring me. I can't watch your games because you play so slow, dude.
Also, Brody, come on the Roundtable of Wraith, maybe.
Maybe
while you're watching this.
I was gonna say just shoot. No, I did it again. I forgot what I was gonna say.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna go to the most important member of the podcast here.
Why are you asking me a question?
Because it's interesting. I'm so sick of talking to these people that think they're decent at Fab. And I'd rather go to a guy that I know is good at Fab.
Dude, I showed up to the pre-release and I legit was like, all right, boys, I've read maybe 12 of these cards. Let's sling it. and I did good.
You've done well in Limited, which is crazy because you don't know what any of these cards do still. So it's very impressive to see. I said the word Vambrace of Determination, and I saw you kind of look up to the side like, I don't think that's a card. But
no, I knew what that one was. But there have been cards mentioned in today's show that I've legit Googled on the fly.
So the reason I turn this to you is not in jest. You are a Ninja enjoyer. And I am hoping that you and maybe Sam can open up a conversation here. Katsu got some help. He got some cards. And in my ignorant opinion, I feel like those cards are pretty impactful. I feel like he got some tools to play with and play around with. And I'm interested in knowing what cards that he got specifically that you're interested in kind of testing out. Yeah, like Dishonor is obviously that line descendant, and I feel like Ancestral, not Ancestral Empowerment, not Descendant
Bonds of
Wave.
Ancestry.
Odds of Ancestry, yeah. I feel like that card is like super busted potentially. And so I'm interested in what your opinions are of the Katsu going forward.
Well, it's interesting because Sam mentioned earlier how he likes to evaluate like a card and then takes the card for like at its strength for what it is and then how it compacts with other cards. And I think that a lot of that mindset comes from Sam playing Ninja early on in his, because that's a great way to build Katsu too, is like what does this card present to me on its own, and then if paired with another card, if it's put in the right combo, what is its ceiling possibly. And so I don't know. It's semi disheartening because I sit here and I look at like the stuff and I'm like, oh, the dude asked me a question and then walks away.
We're here.
Yeah, you guys are here. I just feel like the sad boy side of me is like, man, what's the point? Because like I don't have any threatening like on hits that are gonna deter my opponent from doing what they want to do aside from like damage. Obviously, Dishonored is different. Because that is a massive like change and on hit, but like Levi is saying, like why wouldn't I just then throw in go Ranger mode and threaten these massive amounts of damage that also are gonna slow your opponent and stop what they're trying to do based on your on hit. So like I don't know what the answer is, but as far as cards that intrigue me, yeah, obviously Bonds of Ancestry, Dishonor. But I like the spinning wheel kick. I think is awesome because that's a card that offers a lot of value, like by itself. That 1-for-4 go again that could combo off itself, right? And that's awesome. And then the finishing piece is cool too. The one that could like banish a defending card from the previous chain links.
Chain links.
So like if they defended with like the rampart, you could like banish it, right?
Yeah, if they defend with a Kodachi and you go spinning kick, and then that's an on play. So you spinning wheel kick, and then you on play that. What's that card called?
Cyclone Roundhouse.
Cyclone Roundhouse. Yeah. So like you can randomly banish their rampart. I think that alone like kind of deters Oldhim. I don't know if it's good enough, but that seems like it's a pretty solid, Oldhim deterrent there.
Yeah, so like I think there's definitely cards here, and like I like like I said before, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I like that one. What's the one card I keep bringing up to you that I'm like I think this is good, and Ross
be like water.
No, yeah, I like that card too, but I also like Concealed Blade, that Assassin Ninja card. That's like
I think Sam, you run Concealed Blade and Katsu, right?
Oh yeah, I play 3-ban. That card's nasty.
Yeah, so I was like reading that, and I was making my deck yesterday, and I was like, oh man, I went and bought 3 foils because I was like, yep, this is sick, gotta have them, and I'm like trying to get feedback, and I'm very out of touch with like the community. I like don't really talk to others. I just kind of like brainstorm and then go from there. But it does like kind of listening to the 3 of you guys talk. It's like I really should probably, brainstorming ideas and then test it and then make changes, because I mean I can't answer your question, Ryan, without like getting enough time
that's fair
to play and like see if things change. But yeah, like obviously the Descendant Gustwave line with like the Dishonor and the Bonds of Ancestry, like that stuff seems like it's awesome to give like Surging a new impact, like the Surging line a new impact. And then I like that Be Like Water card because I feel like and maybe I'm stupid, but like you throw the zero, you throw like the 0 for 3 go again, and then they're like, all right, well if I let this hit, they could Katsu and they could pay the $1 to like change its name to Surging Strike, which is like helpful. But then again, it's just like I don't know. It'll have to be all those things will have to be tested. But I like when people interact. I like when people block. I like maintaining tempo, and I like playing decks that it force people to want to block and entertain the exchange, because I do believe Flesh and Blood is at its best or the most fun when both players are actively trying to make the correct call on when to block and when not to block and when to interact. And I like cards that make your opponent, you second guess their decision making. Like Sam said, like with Azuri is a great mind game against your opponent because it really puts them on tilt. Like old school Dorinthia back in the day, like blocking against her, you had to learn how to block against her and do it efficiently. And people are going to have to learn how to do that with Azuri and what they should and shouldn't be doing. And that's when I think the game's at its best. And I came from like playing Fi recently when all that was like, here, I do damage and I don't think about blocking really. And so I'm excited to just tinker around. And Sam, you said you were testing it out and you ended up deciding like this is not an option. That doesn't mean the deck can't be fun, but did you get a chance to play with any of these cards?
Yeah, I tested the deck pretty extensively. I mean, so with my impression of Outsiders, I was looking at Katsu and Uzuri. Those are like the two decks I was considering playing for the Brawl. And so for Katsu, I had a pretty solid list. I mean, this could be like a whole video on its own. So my short consensus
yeah, we should do
was,
that. We should do that.
Yeah, my short summary is that I felt like the Katsu deck had finally become completed to what its initial iteration was trying to be in regards to the surging line. It felt like it was kind of like in comparison to Azalea, where now I feel like Azalea feels completed in regards to her playstyle and how she is trying to like throw out these massive arrows with all these impactful value on hits. Katsu also got these completed extended lines that branch off from the surging line and give you more options in order to do so. The only problem with the deck was that, unlike Azalea, those upsides did not break past his bad sides that he had, and he still has those. So they didn't balance out the fact that you have no armor, you're extremely susceptible to disruption. A lot of the cards in the prior meta that hurt you still do hurt you. And the other upside was that he became extremely explosive and has a much higher ceiling now. But because of that, he also has a much more inconsistent deck build. And that could also be my build comparative to other people's builds. But you have a lot of trade-offs now where you're running a lot more 2 blocks than you were before, you know, because Katsu's always been kind of known to be able to maintain that mid-range blocking game state with flick flacks and 3 blocks where you can kind of trade the Kodachis with an attack to threaten mask. You don't have that luxury as much anymore because Be Like Water, Descendant Gust Wave, they're 2 blocks, and you're playing more Surging Strikes, which are also 2 blocks. And then in addition to that, they also unfortunately balanced these new superpower cards to not be 0 costs, which means they're not nearly as flexible in the deck to be discarded off of Katsu's effect.
Yes, so that's like the major thing.
Yeah, so they net you a lot of a much higher ceiling where you are able to do these massive explosive turns out of almost nowhere, kind of like Fi, but even more just like out of the blue, in turn for being more inconsistent, not as blockable, or like you don't block as well, and also you don't really have this a better strength for the weaknesses that you had prior to. That was my conclusion. Obviously, it's still very early. Like, clearly, it's way too early to just say that that's the case. But that was my early impression, which is why I opted to go for Uzuri, because I think in this meta, especially, 3 blocks are very powerful. I mean, they've always been powerful, but like now there are a lot of bad on hits. There are a lot of disrupting game plans. There are a lot of things that hurt you really bad when you don't have 3 blocks in hand. And Uzuri just had that durability that I felt like Katsu did not have. So that's why I opted to go with Uzuri over Katsu. But I still think he has a lot of unexplored power that we could see come out. You just have to find ways to bypass like the Oldhams and have an effective game plan into Azalea and stuff like that.
And I agree. I think like the mid-range style is like how I would want to play this hero too. Like I want to play the flick flacks and the sinks from time to time, and I want to be able to like, you know, push and then control at the same time. But at least cards like Be Like Water have or like I don't know. Like you said, you're adding so many 2-blocks, but at least some of the 2-blocks have combo on them, right? Doesn't Descendants Ghost Wave, which at least could then be flick-flacked for a 4, which isn't as bad, but still, it's not. Yeah, it's not ideal, but that's interesting. I don't know how to answer that. I hope to be playing more in the coming weeks to like have a better answer for this question, and like Sam said, maybe do a video with him after like my findings and his findings, and see where we can feel later on, because that would be fun.
Yeah. No, I agree. I hope you guys do that, because Katsu's just like, he's the quintessential like flesh and blood. Like, I think that's one of the reasons that attracts me to Azuri so much, as well as like you guys said, it's like flesh and blood to me when I played was blocking and presenting and making decisions and stuff like that. And Azuri is more back and forth. Katsu is always like back and forth. Dorinthia, Bravo, same thing. So yeah, I hope you guys do that, because I'm interested. I'm not a Ninja player. I know you two love Ninja, so I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. I know this video has been going on for quite a bit, so trying to wrap it up here. Levi, real quick,
That's
in a
me.
few. That is you. The hero that we didn't talk about. What are your opinions as a Ranger player on Riptide? In my opinion, he's bad at doing Azalea, and he's bad at doing Lexi. What do you think? Like, is there a Riptide way? Like, I love Riptide. I think he's like super cool. I just think he just does things worse than the other two that are already in existence. What do you think? Like, is there a way that Riptide can be built that we haven't seen yet, or that would help him succeed?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people's first impressions looking at him, reading, I think it's the first half of his text, which is the 1 damage on traps played, are like, wow, we can play like a defensive game plan. And the problem is, when you don't have a weapon, a defensive game plan is not a viable game plan.
Yeah.
It just isn't. So I feel like that part of his text is going to be very marginal. Like, in any good Riptide build that's going to come out, that's going to be a very small percentage of what he's doing is traps. It's probably just going to be like the legendary the legendary traps, and then maybe some additional sideboard stuff. Yeah, just a few other traps. So really the thing that people are going to need to lean into is the second part of this text, which is interesting. I don't know how powerful actually it is, but it's very cool. And I've been seeing people talking about even like Royal Riptide, where you're like zoom zoom firing a bunch of go agains and all that.
Crazy.
And then you get to use like Death Dealer off Tunic as your like ability to just use Tunic to translate into a card. Everything's 0 cost, red line. I don't know how good it is, but I think if we do end up seeing a good Riptide build, it's going to be an aggressive build that leans into the second half of his text. Because any deck leaning into the first half of his text is bad, or is not viable into a large portion of the meta, and any build or any Ranger like Riptide deck that isn't using the bottom half of his text should just be playing Azalea or Lexi.
Yeah.
That's probably overly simplified, but that's roughly what my assessment would be. And I have no idea what those builds are going to end up on or how good they'll be.
For sure.
Just wait until we get a card called Codex's Salvage, and he can get defense reactions back from his graveyard and put them back into his arsenal.
No,
so you just get
instantly.
collapsing trapped 4 times, dude. Oh,
It's an
so good.
instant. It's an instant.
Yeah. No, it's so good.
Might as well.
Infinite.
Your opponent discards a card after you play put a defense reaction into your arsenal from your discard. Your opponent discards a card.
Yeah. Man, if
Then
only
you do it.
Why not?
any of the reactions that made your opponent mill or discard would be so much cooler if they weren't conditional on attack reaction, like Pendulum Trap and the Spike Pit Trap. Like, there might be a way that you could make him try and fatigue other decks, but not enough decks run attack reactions to make that a consistent game plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they weirdly like curved him. Like it was a weird, like he starts with 38 health. Like his traps are all like legendary. They're all on these very specific like triggers. It was an interesting curve. But yeah, it's crazy because like I've never played Ranger, but I saw him and I've kind of messed with him on Talishar. And he's like so fun to play. I just wish he was like good. He has no way to win. It's like unfortunate.
Yeah, it's definitely something I want to explore, but I have not gotten to yet.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Does anybody have any parting words about the brawl, about the the meta, the decks, or anything like that we haven't covered?
I do.
Okay.
You played in the brawl?
Oh, man.
No, I have parting words that I want to say because, and they are the following. The two of you guys, it just sounded like per happily. I just sounded like per happily.
Yeah, you
this
did.
It's a closing statement, and it goes like this. I think it's cool that the two of you guys have elevated to such a level in this community that you are respected by people that when we first began, we would have been like, wow, these people will never know any of our names, or it'd be awesome if they did. And now so many people in the Flesh and Blood world, looked at the two of you as leaders and as players and as like ambassadors for the game and in different regards. And not one time throughout that process of the two of you gaining notoriety or whatever you may call it has that changed the way that you've interacted with us. You've never put us to the side or whatnot. And even though we may not be as active as we once were or as dedicated to the game as the two of you guys can be at times, that level of like respect and friendship is like vastly appreciated. Even though there are periods of time where I can not have spoken to the two of you in a while, it never feels like I can't come up to you and shoot the shit and say hi and catch up with you. And so I think it's amazing, and the things that you guys have gone on to do in this game have been nothing but awesome. And so like my parting words would be like, just keep being yourselves, and the riches and the things that come to you guys throughout this process of playing this game that everybody in the community enjoys and loves is so rewarding to see good people have good things come to them and hard work pay off in a great way, because the insight that you guys drop and the respect that you show to your peers and people in this community is world class. Things that I couldn't do, things that I know myself I would struggle to do, you guys do an excellent job of. And I think it's really cool. And you guys are like our little famous bros who we met at Fair Game and now and befriended us, and now you guys are like these two rock stars of the game. And so like Ryan and I really appreciate how cool it is that we can message you two and be like, hey, jump on after this. The whole Fab world is talking about the two of you, and we get to be the two idiots that go, hey, you guys want to like do a podcast tomorrow? So that's pretty cool.
No, I mean, I love you guys. I really appreciate everything. It's pretty crazy to think like we've almost been playing this game for 2 years now. And even though that doesn't seem like a long time, like my life has changed dramatically since we first played this game. And you can look at my nationals video and how short my hair was to where it is now. And that's just like a visible representation of how much time has passed. And it's pretty incredible, like where we all have started and where we all are now. But like that Flesh and Blood has just been the vehicle for that, right? And that we can all still come together, even how different our lives are now and how separate we are. And I still think about, like you said, those Fair Game beginnings, the post-COVID world where we're all coming back together. And I also greatly appreciate you guys. Whenever you talk to us, whenever we see you events, it's like no time has passed. And I love you all the same and wish the best for you. And I'm just so happy we can still spend these moments together too.
Mm-hmm.
Hell yeah. On that note,
yeah, top that, Ryan. Ha.
I have nothing. I have nothing. I appreciate you guys watching the video. Please let us know if you have any questions or comments. Just drop a comment in the thread, Sam or Levi, or If you have a question for Jim for whatever reason, he'll respond as well. But if you have a question for Levi or Sam or whatever, please, feel free. These guys are very open. They're very accessible. They're amazing. But on behalf of Sam and Levi, Jim, I am Ryan with the Roundtable of Wraith. And on that note, we hope to see you guys again. See ya.
See ya.